Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Brockhampton called Saturation 3. So I'm not gonna lie, I had mixed feelings about this the second I heard about it. Hell, they're the same mixed feelings I have whenever a band or an act decides to drop multiple projects in a single year when they could have combined them into one uniquely strong album. Actually, I'm not sure I stand by that in the same way anymore. The fact remains that I've covered a fair few artists over the course of this show, hell even this year, who have dropped more than one project in the course of a year, sometimes with a radically different focus and style where the quality actually remains somewhat consistent. Look at Billy Woods or Eric Taxon. I think my bigger issue with Brockhampton is that while both Saturation 1 and 2 are good albums, they are a shade away from greatness, at least for me. And it's hard not to feel like the thematic arc is retreading familiar territory without really evolving on it. Then there's the other big concern. Burnout. Quite simply, churning out multiple albums in a single year with a distinct promotion and marketing arc, especially when you're an independent collective only using major distributors, well, it might be easier in the internet age. It's also the sort of work effort and strain that can push working relationships to their absolute limit. And thus, when Kevin Abstract made his fake-out post that Saturation 3 was their last hip-hop record as a collective, I actually believed it. Artistic collectives have broken up over far less. Now, of course, that's not quite the case. It was a fake out after all. And we're probably going to have more Brockhampton coming up, maybe even next year, along with solo projects that will inevitably show up. But in the meantime, the critical buzz behind Saturation 3 was pretty damn promising. So what did we get with this? Honestly, it's a little tough to tell. I can see why some critics who have been lukewarm on Brockhampton are more charitable towards Saturation 3, because to some extent, you can tell this is one of their most refined projects to date. The chemistry is a lot stronger, the writing seems more refined, the production is more varied, and yet up until I gave this album one final listen, I was gonna say it didn't quite connect, even in the same way that the first two Saturation records did. But with that last final listen, and then two more after that, I think I finally get it. And while I'm not quite sure this record hits the stark high points that have characterized their last two albums, it also doesn't hit the low points, and thus winds up as easily their most consistent project to date, and one that opens up a lot of doors going forward, which I find really encouraging. Now, if you're familiar with Brockhampton's sound and their approach at this point and a lot of their rappers and members, while the overall tones in production, they're more diverse, the core members remain pretty consistent in a lot of their strengths and their weaknesses. Kevin Abstract, he remains more of the sensitive leader type, tweaking his vocal tone with layers of vocal filters. Don McLemmon, he's the most technically skilled and insightful as a rapper, probably still my favorite, but he has unfortunately developed a taste for auto-tune that doesn't quite flatter his vocal tone. Amir Vaughn has the best stage presence easily, but his rhymes can be a little disjointed. Merlin's delivery is the most wild, but he's often ahead of the curve in terms of a lot of his insight and references, especially on this album. Joba's crooning, it's only gotten better, although I still argue that Bareface is the best secret weapon that Brockhampton has ever had in their arsenal. And Matt Champion, well, okay, as much as I can find him a bit of a limited MC at points, he actually does showcase a lot of real improvements in the structure and layering of his bars and flows. And I actually really like a lot of his singing on songs like Rental. It was really quite impressive there. What's more pronounced is how the group is acting more and more like a cohesive unit within the individual songs, often trading bars back and forth with an ease and comfort that I definitely appreciate, even integrating Robert's Spanish interludes more effectively than ever, with some absolutely gorgeous arranged instrumentals behind them. They sound beautiful, and they really rise above just being interludes. Now, do I wish the entire group as a whole refined some of their wordplay and lyrical construction a little bit more, so more of those rhymes bar to bar actually connected? Of course I do. But the more Brockhampton projects that I consume, the more I realize it might just be a factor of the fast, homegrown, throw everything at the wall approach that's coming to characterize a lot of this group, especially on the three Saturation albums. And yet, that artistic focus and cohesion does take center stage when you start digging into a lot of the content and the lyrics on this album. And the position of Saturation 3 as the conclusion of a trilogy does shift the context of how I listen and interpret this album. If the first Saturation was the genesis and the come-up, and the second was the ecstatic moment of clarity racing to that top point, Saturation 3 might start off closer to the apex, with Boogie as the explosion of delight, but Merlin's verse is starting to highlight an odd hollowness that begins creeping through the rest of the project that each member realizes. Now this is where, despite my criticisms that Brockhampton have retread similar thematic territory, Saturation 3 shifts both in content and overall mood to a more somber affair. Hell, they even call out that they've repeated stuff in the past, and this record's not doing that. Less outright aggression and more open questions surrounding whatever might come next. After all, if you get close to the top and you're still not finding satisfaction, where the hell do you go from there? And that yawning sense of dissatisfaction and emptiness, even in the face of fame, that's pretty potent. Especially when Kevin Abstract is conscious that he still hasn't quite pulled the boy band into true pop star territory where he could actually get Harry Styles' number and that he'd listen. Joba, he's succumbing to some bad habits after his girl left and his dog died. And Merlin realizes that the girl with him on the tour bus doesn't trust that he won't hurt her, but he also knows it's probably the right decision, and he's a little bit dispirited about that. And as the album progresses, you can see each band member see the lingering consequences for charting such an unknown path to fame so damn quickly in a way for them that might seem completely natural but alien to everybody outside. Some retreating into the safety of their process, no desire to return to a far bleaker past, especially on Kevin's part, but wary of critics who might misunderstand them. Anxious for that spotlight and the fans to see the honest truth of what they're building, but also a little conscious of some of that vulnerability they'll expose. And as Dom emphasizes on the two-part song Sister Nation, he's going to continue to blow past established standards to seize control of the narrative pen despite the world's projections upon him, even though he doesn't quite know where that narrative will ultimately lead for them. And it's a really potent choice to then end the album with Teen, which might rely on Bareface's gorgeous reverb-soaked guitars for the first half of the song, before to switch things up and letting each member take to the mic one last time, where they might have evolved and changed, but the world really hasn't quite caught up, or in some cases regressed beneath them. And thus, when the album clicks into the sample that drove Heat, the first song on Saturation, at the end of that song, the artistic cycle, it's gotta continue. Society might sputter backwards, but Brockhampton, they sure as hell won't. So okay, the group is only growing more refined, a little bit more mature too. There's a stark lyrical departure thematically in a promising direction that emphasizes Brockhampton's careful balance of exuberant bravado and confessional vulnerability. So why am I not over the moon about this album? Well, honestly, the more listens that I gave it, the more it circled back to a lot of the production. And at this point, I think it's more the tones that Brockhampton chooses just aren't really my cup of tea. I can appreciate why people like them, but it's not really for me. I don't think I'll ever quite get on board with the wonky pitch shifting and vocal filters that Kevin Abstract uses all the time. And just like with Saturation 2, this record seems to inhabit more of the odd tunings, MIA-esque blaring synths, and mid-tempo distortion than to say the hyper-aggressive bangers or the sweeter organic passages that the band is uncannily good at balancing, which more characterize Saturation 1. Now, this time around, I am hearing some tonal choices that might seem a little closer to the Timbaland-esque futurism of the mid-2000s, or even some of the more distinctive traditional hip-hop elements, like the off-kilter but jaunty piano on Zipper, or the brighter, more pop-leaning keys on Hottie, or the really sweet horn line on Johnny playing off the spiraling tape and the scratching. Easily one of my favorite instrumentals on that project. I really dug it. And that's before you get to the sharp but very effective beat switch on a song like Sister Nation. From gritty blasts of bassy synth, one of the most common elements driving any of the grooves on this record, and it really helps contribute to that loose feel, to more of an oily progression that wouldn't be out of place in the late 70s, early 80s synth pop scene. And again, I like how well this project can balance out the whooping cacophony of a tune like Boogie at the start, and by the end of the album with a song like Team resolve into these dreamy, overdubbed guitars and Bareface's frankly stunning falsetto. But I can't say I really like the slapdash tuning of the guitars on songs like Stupid or Bleach. And if they're gonna get a guest singer for the latter, I really wish they just stuck with Bareface instead of Ryan Beatty, who, yeah, he's serviceable, but doesn't really add enough to really fully flesh out that hook, especially when the outro is gonna use Bareface anyway. And again, it's hard to say if any of these songs have the same electricity or the instantaneous hooks that made the first two Saturations so potent, but again, when so many of these songs, I feel like they're decomposing at the seams, and a lot of the beats almost on the verge of collapse, which of course is intentional given a lot of the themes of this album, I'm willing to be a little bit more forgiving in that territory. It might be a little bit more unstable, but yeah, it fits. But as a whole, as this is the third Brockhampton record that I have reviewed in 2017, you know, I'm still not quite sure they've dropped the undeniable shot of genre-bending greatness just yet, but after the Saturation trilogy, I'm more convinced than ever they've got the raw potential to get there as a group, especially with the refinements that are coming across this album in particular. And thus, while I'm not really sure they could rank any of these being my favorite of the trilogy, like the last two, I'm giving this a strong 7 out of 10, and for certain a recommendation, him. This one, it probably leaves me the most encouraged for the boy band going forward. Brockhampton might have had a really potent 2017, but 2018, it looks to be even better. Frankly, I can't wait to hear any more. So you want to get up to speed, check these guys out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. This is probably going to be one of my last reviews before I start putting out year-end lists. I think I maybe have one more left, and then I've got a whole collection of short reviews I'm going to be chugging out, but we'll see how that goes. Until then, if you want to buy this record, and I recommend you do, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you Brockhampton fans to tell me how great this record is and how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to help support this channel or get involved in my scheduling process, especially going into the new year, the link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.